of the customs arrangements. First of all, every good which is exported from GB to Northern Ireland will be subject to a customs declaration. Movements will be subject to checks. Unless it can be proved that the goods are not going outside Northern Ireland, duty will be paid. Only when you've proved that they aren't going will the duty be paid back. And on top of that, there will be all of the regulations of the European Union imposed in Northern Ireland. Now, if anybody tells me that that does not represent an economic, customs, legal border, hard border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, I don't know what a hard border looks like then. And furthermore, when it came during debates in this House, I have heard it said that if there were to be an extra camera placed on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, or one additional piece of paper had to be signed, that would represent a break in the Good Friday Agreement, because it would represent a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. So on one hand, you can have all of these checks between Northern Ireland and GB, and it doesn't count as a hard border, but one camera on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic does count as a hard border. And I think that shows how false the argument has been put forward by the government, that they have not accepted a hard border between Northern Ireland. And what's the implication of that? It means that we are, first of all, cut off from the country to which we belong, and secondly, our economic relationships with the biggest market that we have are damaged. The second argument being put forward by the Minister today is this, that, well, you could get out of it. You can vote against it. And that will. I'll give it a moment to. Let me just finish this argument. You can vote against it, but of course there's a mechanism, in Northern Ireland, and for dealing with sensitive issues. It's enshrined in an internationally binding agreement, and that mechanism, because of the sensitive nature of politics in Northern Ireland, says that any controversial issue has to be decided by a cross-community vote. That part of the Belfast Agreement, which is so sacrosanct in this House and to those who negotiate it, has now been torn out of the Belfast Agreement and will give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he's making his own powerful argument, which we have heard. Could I ask him, in a limited time available, that he turns his attention and addresses the amendment made by my right honourable friend for Dorset West? Because if he's concerned about a hard border, Mr. Speaker, he must recognise that the door may be opening, if that passes today, for a hard border and no-deal Brexit to emerge.
Well, first of all, the hard border is there. And, I've made the argument, and I defy anybody to tell me that if you've got to fill in a customs declaration, you've got to have lorries and vans searched at the ports coming into Northern Ireland, you've got to pay taxes on goods which come from GB, that's not a hard border already. And we will. And let me come to this issue of consent, because it's important. Because the Minister dismisses unionist fears by saying you can vote your way out of it. Well, of course, the mechanism for voting our way out of it is laid down by an international treaty. Why is that not going to be adhered to? Because the government and the EU and the Irish government knows that would be an effective way of Northern Ireland doing the very thing that the Minister has said we'll be able to do. Remove that, and you remove the ability of Northern Ireland to take itself out of this arrangement. And of course, we only get the chance after 4 years. We're put into it without any consent at all.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree with me that in Northern Ireland at the moment, and for the last 1,000 days where we have had no government, there has been a majority, not just a simple majority, a significant majority of parties and people who want to get back to work. We are being held and blackmailed by a minority party, Sinn Féin, and yet this government has defended that minority veto for over 1,000 days, meaning there's no government in Northern Ireland.
Well, of course, that's the irony, that we have to avoid having an assembly because the voting mechanism of the Belfast Agreement must be adhered to. But when it comes to getting out of this arrangement, which has severe consequences for Northern Ireland, the mechanism of the Belfast Agreement doesn't have to be adhered to. Now again, either we avoid a hard border, or we have a hard border. Either we adhere to the Belfast Agreement, or we don't adhere to the Belfast Agreement. And this agreement that the government has signed turns all of those things on their head. And that's the reason why we will oppose it. And I'm sure that honourable members across the House who have defended their constituency interests, whether it's the fishing industry in Scotland or in Cornwall, whether it's the industrial the rights of workers in their own constituencies, they will understand why we will not give into this agreement, which we believe does damage to our part of the United Kingdom, and which will lead to the focus of attention away from London towards Dublin. Because don't forget, we'll be tied into an arrangement where the laws for Northern Ireland will be made in Brussels. The British government will have no input. The Stormont government will have no input. So where does the focus of attention come then for industry and lobby groups and politicians in Northern Ireland? Dublin. And so we move towards United Ireland. We were asked what we would do in relation to the amendment. All I can say is this, that we would be failing in our duty if we do not use every strategy which is available to try and get guarantees, changes and alterations which will safeguard the interests of the United Kingdom, the interests of our constituents and the interests that we represent.
Order. A 3-minute limit now applies. Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was planning to be brief anyway. I campaigned to leave, Mr. Speaker, but at every stage of the campaign I argued that we should leave on good terms with our friends and neighbours, that we should leave with a deal. I supported the previous Prime Minister in what she sought to achieve. I pay tribute to this Prime Minister for what he has done in bringing forward a deal that, after a year of turbulence in this place, when we have not really come near to finding anything a majority in this House can agree on, what is absolutely clear today is that we are much closer than we have been before to something which this Parliament is willing to give its support to. I pay tribute to the Prime Minister for achieving that, and I strongly urge this House to unite behind this agreement. But I specifically, Mr. Speaker, want to talk about the amendment being brought forward by the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. And I want everyone on all sides of the House to think about this. I know my Right Honourable friend well. He has his reasons for bringing this amendment forward, but the consequence of it is that this House, at a moment when the nation is watching us to see what decision we will take about the deal that has been brought back from Brussels, this House today may decline to form an opinion. That is the consequence of passing the amendment, that we will today not decide whether we support this deal or not. And I put it to you, Mr. Speaker, indeed.
I'm extremely grateful. Here are practices of long-standing practice going back to my boyhood. But the truth is that the public are saying to us, enough is enough. Get on, get out, so we can get ahead. It's as simple as that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend, and that, to my mind, is the crux of the issue around this amendment today. Are we really going to say to the public today, we're not today going to make our minds up. We're going to yet again defer the decision. And every member will have to go back to their constituents and explain why today, in a moment that is the first Saturday sitting since 1982, we were not able to take a decision about whether we support the principle of this deal or not. I think that would be deeply damaging to our democracy. I think it would be deeply damaging to the reputation of this House and of every individual in this Parliament. And, Mr. Speaker, I strongly urge everyone here, whatever their views, whether they are for this deal, whether they're against this deal, let us not put ourselves in a position today where we're simply not taking a decision and saying to the public, do you know what, we'll put it off to another day. I do not think, Mr. Speaker, we can afford to do that. I urge everyone in this House not to allow that situation to happen.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. Liz Kendall.
Mr. Speaker, the decision we make today will shape the future of our country for years to come. And in making that decision, three issues weigh most heavily on my mind. The first is the potential risks this deal poses to the future of the Union of the United Kingdom. We have heard many times already that the deal explicitly separates Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, with a border down the Irish Sea and with Northern Ireland remaining part of the EU's trading system, something the Prime Minister promised he would never do. And these proposals, I fear, have a knock-on implications for Scotland's future relationship in the UK too. I fear that the deal is an open goal to the SNP and their bid for independence. We've already heard the argument that Northern Ireland voted to remain, they're still part of the EU with frictionless trade. Why shouldn't Scotland have that too? Mr. Speaker, I have always believed in the importance of unions, that we are stronger and have more power and control when we work together. I don't expect all honourable members opposite to share that most fundamental of Labour beliefs, but as members of the Conservative and Unionist Party, I find it very hard to believe they'd vote for a deal that could put the future of our union at risk. The deal also has potentially profound consequences for the future shape of our economy and public services, paving the way for the government to take England, Scotland and Wales out of the single market and customs union, the hardest of all hard Brexit, short of no deal, with all the risks that brings for manufacturing and services. And whatever the Prime Minister claims, there are no legal guarantees for workers' and consumers' rights and environmental standards. They can deny it till they're blue in the face, but we remember it was precisely in order to cut those rights and standards that Brexiteers argued for years that we should leave the EU. So they cannot convince us otherwise now. And to be honest, I wish honourable members opposite would just be honest and say we believe the future of the country is a low-tax, small-state, deregulated country. They've got a perfect right to think that, but they should have the guts to put that vision of Britain to the British people. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the implications for our democracy, I know colleagues on both sides of the House understand the risks this deal poses to the Union and to our economy, but they believe the risks to our democracy of not voting for this deal are even worse. But the truth is, this deal is not what people were promised during the referendum. Neither will it get Brexit done. Far from it. We will have years more negotiations with another cliff edge at the end of the transition. I don't doubt that many people will be angry if this deal is voted down tonight, but we cannot put that back. We must put that back to the British people so they can decide, is this the future for the country that they want?
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the view of my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Rushcliffe, that the deal that's being presented to us has many flaws. One of the principal flaws is that as a unionist, I think it does threaten the Union of the United Kingdom very directly. Although I'm bound to have to also accept that I think Brexit generally threatens the Union of the United Kingdom very directly, and I've never really seen an easy way of trying to resolve that and deliver Brexit at the same time. Secondly, although the deal is a matter on which I should congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, he negotiated it, he was unhappy with the earlier deal, and he now says he's satisfied with it. I remain of the view that if one looks at its detail in terms of the likely negotiating process that will have to take place next year, I am left in very serious doubt that it will in fact be possible to achieve a free trade agreement, and that therefore this House will be confronted in 12 months' time with very similar challenges to the ones that we face at present, and with deep economic consequences if we can't find a way through them. So I'm afraid I am not enthusiastic about the deal. I was listening to my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, who's been very consistent in her view on the issue of Brexit. Namely, that for us as a House, or MPs, to both offer a referendum and then try to thwart it by our own actions or reject it is a con trick. And I don't disagree with her about that, although we have this disagreement, and yet I don't believe that it is in any way a con trick when one finds oneself ending up with something so utterly different from what was being offered. I don't see anything wrong in going back and asking the electorate whether that is what they really want. And I remain of the view that that possibility exists, And if it were to be a majority view of the House that it should be done, I would support it and seek to have that carried out, because I think the consequences are so momentous. But I'd also like to make clear to the Prime Minister that if that were to fail, I would not seek to oppose leaving on these terms. I want to make that quite clear. We've got to resolve this. But that then brings me to the amendment of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. It is frankly extraordinary that a government that says it wants to follow a sensible process then seeks to railroad that process in a way that makes it likely that proper debate will not take place. And to that I profoundly object, and for that reason I will support that amendment, and anybody in this House who wants an orderly form of Brexit should do so as well.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be voting for the amendment of the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset because it is an insurance policy against no deal by accident or by design. What is very clear from the debate so far is this, that the deal the Prime Minister has brought back will give us less good access to our biggest, nearest and most important market than we enjoy today, and less good access than the deal negotiated by the former Prime Minister would have given, and I cannot understand why anyone should regard that as something to be celebrated, cheered or recommended. It is no wonder the government does not want to do an economic assessment, because it would show what the government's last economic assessment shows. And I thought it was very striking as my right honourable friend, in his typically forensic and eloquent way, told the House what it would mean in practice to watch the euphoria that was evident on the benches opposite earlier give way to cold realisation of what it will mean for the businesses and industries that we represent in our constituencies. And I simply ask the question, Mr. Speaker, why would we want to undermine our future economy, investment, opportunity and potential in this way? The second point I want to make is about consent. Because the Prime Minister was right in asking us how are we going to heal the rift that Brexit has created. If this deal is defeated today, it will be the fourth time in which the House has been unable to agree a way forward. And I am the first to admit that we cannot carry on like this. We need to find a way forward, and that is why a way of doing so has been offered in a very prescient intervention a year ago by my honourable friends, the members for Hove and Sedgefield, with their compromise proposal. And it is a compromise because there is in politics a division between those who advocate if we can't get a deal, we leave with no deal, and on the other hand, those who say, let's just cancel the result of the referendum, pretend it never happened. Now, I do not subscribe to either of those views. The compromise is to say there is a way in which we can get this done and achieve a decision, and that is by asking the British people. And at the heart of that question is this: do the British people have the right to change their minds? Yep. Now, I fear that some people who reject a referendum would cry, no, they don't. We had the one vote and that's it. I disagree with that view, because it is fundamental to our democracy that when the facts change, events change, or time passes, we should have the opportunity to change our minds if we wish. I do not know what the answer to that question is. The only people who know are the British people, and that is why I will vote for my honourable friend's amendment today, because I think we should ask the people what they now want.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for me this has been really quite a long journey. I want to say very simply, and get it out of the way straight away, having given a great deal of consideration to all the issues that have been discussed over the last few weeks, and having had the opportunity to discuss with ministers and in Number 10 in various other places and in our groups and one thing and another, that I have come to the conclusion that we must support this deal. I go further and say that one of the reasons why I believe it is so important, and I say this with great concern with respect to the DUP, because I know that there are elements about this deal which do fall short. And I'm going to say something else too, and that is that with regard to Article 4, I still regard that as a serious problem, but I am glad that the Prime Minister has responded, as he did today, with a personal assurance that he will ensure in the bill, when it comes, that parliamentary sovereignty will be recognised, notwithstanding, I use the word notwithstanding, the provisions that otherwise apply under the withdrawal agreement in Article 4, and furthermore, that he will also give us a guarantee that where vital interests of this country are affected, the European Scrutiny Committee will continue to have the opportunity to make sure that the House has the opportunity to consider and vote on questions which so arise. I won't enlarge on that now because that hasn't been entirely finalised. The bill has not been published, but I do say that there are signs of very great progress in that regard, because that is about the principle of sovereignty and the principle of consent. If the Select Committee procedures are followed along the lines that I am proposing, actually I also believe that Northern Ireland will benefit from that, because they themselves will be able to come into the committee proceedings and give evidence with regard to the manner in which this is operating for them, and then the matter could then, if all goes well, in terms of the bill itself, they will have the opportunity to have a vote on that on the floor of the House. Now, I am simply making that point clear now because I believe in the present circumstances this is a very, very historic moment, but it is a moment which we have to seize. So let us get out by the 31st of October, no second referendum, no revocation of Article 50, get Brexit done, let's have a general election, and let's sort this out once and for all.
Alison McGovern.
I want to say some words about the nature of the deal before us. And Mr. Speaker, this is all a question of trust. Whether or not we should support this deal depends on trust. For the people of Northern Ireland, we have heard that they cannot trust this deal from their representatives today. This could take us backwards, not forwards, in Northern Ireland, Mr. Speaker. And we are learning about the Conservative and Unionist Party that before long they will be the party of only England. They are putting our union at risk. For the people of the GB Northern Ireland border, whether that's Birkenhead, Holyhead or Stranraer, they cannot trust this deal. And the Conservative Party is becoming only the party of the south of England. For the people, Mr. Speaker, of our manufacturing towns, we know the damage, as has been said by the member for Holborn and St Pancras and Francis O'Grady of the TUC, we know the damage that this deal will do to our manufacturing towns. And the Conservative Party is becoming only the party of the South East home counties. For Conservatives who want a soft Brexit, the member for Raleigh gave it away. The ERG have decided. So the Conservative Party is becoming only the party of the ERG, and this is their deal, Mr. Speaker. For the next generation, they cannot trust this deal on environmental protections. And the protests we have seen about climate change, those voices are not heard. On freedom of movement and on our rights at work, generations of trade unions cannot trust this deal. Now, we on the Labour Party benches here, we are representatives, not delegates. But I would challenge any Labour MP to disagree with the delegates of any trade union branch in this country. You cannot trust this deal. The Conservative Party is making itself untrustworthy, Mr. Speaker, because instead of rational policies, it's made itself a historical reenactment society seeking to undo 40 years of progress, of which they played a part. But their interpretation of our country's history is untrustworthy. And I want to mention one lesson from our history. When at the fall of France, the Polish pilots who came to Britain to fight with us called Britain Last Hope Island. And then, as now, solidarity in Europe, not a Britain that stands alone, should be the source of our hope. That was true then, it's true now. This deal is bad for Britain and we should vote it down.
Dr. Liam Fox.
May I first say a word about the amendment? Those who are thinking of voting for this amendment tonight should not do under the illusion that it will take no deal off the table. No deal cannot be taken off the table. We can ask the EU for an extension. The EU do not need to grant an extension. The only way to take no deal off the table is to accept the only deal that is actually on offer. And the European Union. Mr. Speaker, there are 3 reasons why I think we should vote in favour of this deal today. The first is that it delivers on the referendum. And let's just go back to first principles. We made a contract with the people of the United Kingdom using the 2 elements of our constitution. Direct democracy, which said to them, we will not or cannot make a decision, therefore you must take the decision. And then using representative democracy to say, we, the House of Commons, will determine how to implement that decision. That is what we're being asked to do today. It is our duty to deliver on what we have promised the British people if we want to maintain faith in our electoral and political system itself. 80% of us on the Conservative and Labour benches stood on a manifesto that specifically said we would honour the result of the referendum. And it's not good enough to say, that you actually favour a deal and then want to vote down every single detail of every single deal that is ever made. The public will regard it at best as disingenuous. When those then say to us, well, let's have another referendum, why would any citizen of this country, looking at their parliament that said we've been asked to have a referendum, vote in a second referendum if we failed to deliver on what we promised in the first one? This is a question of faith in our electoral system itself. The second reason, Mr. Speaker, why we should deliver on this is that it gets us onto the territory of our future relationship itself. 3.5 years talking about the divorce and almost no time talking about the future relationship. There will be a great debate to be had about the level of alignment we have sector by sector with the European economy. That's why there is such a strong case for having a general election. Let's actually get out and make the case about what we believe in the future relationship. It also gives us the chance to help shape global trade policy in an independent trade policy at a time global trade is slowing down. And finally, it allows us to get onto other issues. So much of our political bandwidth has been taken up by Brexit that the public feel that we no longer talk about the issues that actually matter to them. Of course, there's no such thing as a perfect deal. I voted for the previous deal 3 times with strong reservations, and I've got strong reservations today. But it has come to the point where we have to deliver on the contract that we made with the people of Britain. It is time for us to put differences aside and put together the sort of stupid party political games we've had and actually do what we promised.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've reached the fork in the road. We must now choose. So do we choose the route that leads us to an outward-looking, confident nation, punching above its weight in a European Union battling for liberal values in a world that is increasingly illiberal, isolationist and belligerent? A course which guarantees that EU citizens, many of whom have lived here since the 60s and 70s, won't have to worry about proving they are entitled to health care, and provides for their UK counterparts in the EU who won't need to fret over what action to take should the time-limited 6 months healthcare guaranteed by our government expire? Or do we let ourselves be led by a colourful Pied Piper who chose his path and this deal, not out of any conviction that his path was just, rational or economically beneficial for our nation, but because he believed it was the most secure way of achieving his own ambition? Do we meekly follow a man whose excellent deal, according to such government analysis as they've been willing to make available, will leave each household at least £2,000 worse off and hit British jobs and living standards with the ferocity of the austerity triggered by the 2008 crash? This is a deal which, as the Prime Minister confirmed in his earlier rather rambling and dissembling contribution, may not survive the transition period and could still lead to a no-deal crash out? Do we follow in the footsteps of a man who just a month ago, to a rapturous DUP gathering, claimed the precious union was in good shape, and a month later dealt the union a hammer blow which could shatter it within the space of just a couple of years? Are we so afraid of our shadow and lacking in confidence in our capacity to work the EU system to our advantage, as we have successfully done for decades, that we have to fall back on a nostalgic vision of empire and a buccaneering Britain? That is the choice in front of us today. I hope we will choose the former path. It would require one further step, a people's vote, to give the people the final say. That would be the democratic way, a way supported by the hundreds of thousands of people over there in Parliament Square as we speak. That is the only way of stopping the Brexit rot in its tracks and putting this issue to bed. I would urge all members to follow that path and vote for the amendment and reject this calamitous deal.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Mr. Speaker, I've always set out wanting to agree a deal with the EU that delivers the outcome of the referendum in the terms of the 2017 manifesto that I've stood on. I've fought against an undemocratic no deal and always voted for a deal. In fact, I voted for a deal more times than the Prime Minister. I've even voted for a deal more times than the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Transport Secretary and the Environment Secretary combined. Despite this, I've had the whip removed, and those who voted down deal after deal have been rewarded with jobs in the Cabinet. I'd like to support this deal as well, but the government have been sending mixed messages. Whilst ministers at the dispatch box say they want a deal, anonymous number 10 sources insist that they'll break the law and deliver no deal. Owing to this and the government's Janus-like ability to face in both directions, I cannot support the government without assurances. Those assurances come in the form of the amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. This will ensure that the government and the members of my former party stick to their promises. It will also ensure that there's enough time to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill, which will likely remain a mammoth piece of legislation. The House may notice that I'm saying very little about the content of the deal. I was always taught that if you had nothing nice to say, say nothing. Suffice it to say, it is substantially worse than the deal negotiated by the Right Honourable Member from Maidenhead. And perhaps this deal's sole merit is to cast her redoubtable negotiating efforts in a more positive light. Hear, hear. And it is a great shame that opposition members of Parliament did not vote for that deal. Hear. Indeed, the Foreign Secretary let the cat out of the bag yesterday when he said that this was a cracking deal for Northern Ireland because it will keep frictionless access to the single market. My residents and businesses in Cheshire would like that frictionless access to the single market. And if it's such a great deal for Northern Ireland, why can't my constituents have it too? So I will back the deal subject to the reassurance of the amendment, but I don't like the deal, and given the choice of a dodgy deal or remain, I suspect many constituents would opt for the latter. And as such, if I get an opportunity to vote on an amendment in respect of the people's vote, I will vote for that amendment too.
Liz Saville-Roberts. No, she's not in her place. I beg her pardon. I didn't intend any discourtesy to the Honourable Lady. Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, on June the 26th, in 2016, we had a referendum which was in effect a snapshot on a single day. A distorted photograph was obtained. It was distorted by false images. It was distorted by fibs on the bus, by fake promises of getting an easy, quick deal that would convey all the benefits of the free trade that our country has enjoyed for so many years as a member of the European Union. It was given and it was created by preying on people's fears and fueling their prejudices at the same time. 3.5 years later, we now at least have some clarity On 2 occasions, this government has negotiated a deal with the European Union. Now, I think, like the Honourable Lady has just said, that this is indeed a very bad deal for all the really good reasons that so many honourable and right honourable members have said. This place remains divided, and the answer is not yet another general election. The last general election didn't help us. It didn't solve anything because it can't. The only way now to solve this matter is to get it back where it began, in effect, which is to the people, to put that deal to a confirmatory referendum. Mr. Speaker, people are entitled to change their minds as the evidence changes and they now see with clarity what Brexit is all about. And our young people who weren't able to vote in 2016, they surely must now have the right to be a part and to determine their own futures, given that so many of them will be affected. No, I won't, we haven't got time. Will be so affected by Brexit. And it's right, too, that everybody, now that we know what it looks like, and this deal, by goodness, is such a bad deal. It's bad for the union, it's bad for jobs, and it undoubtedly opens a back door to the no deal that certain members of the Conservative Party undoubtedly want. And I gently say to honourable and right honourable colleagues opposite, how they can sit there claiming to be unionists and to vote for this deal defies belief. Mr. Speaker, what we need is a people's vote, and that's why over 1 million people today have come to London. Let's get it back to the British people. Let's get Brexit done, but by way of taking it back to that confirmatory referendum.
No. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank all members of this House for their passionate contributions today. And I'd like to thank the Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster for sharing his mints earlier with the shadow front bench. But that's where my joviality ends, sadly, because today is a historic day. It's a day on which less than 650 people sat here now will agonise over whether they are about to make the right choice for their communities, industries and future generations. And today they ask themselves, is what is before us today truly a deal which protects and enhances their communities? And sadly, the simple and irreconcilable truth is that it does not. And as the Shadow Secretary of State responsible for business, energy and industrial strategy, I want to make it clear to this House, if agreed, this deal would be a disaster for this country and we must reject it. Mr. Speaker, on workers' rights, we simply cannot trust what the Prime Minister is saying. They say this deal protects workers, yet instead of strengthening protections, they have specifically changed the legally binding withdrawal agreement to remove any commitments on workers' rights. And I think it tells us something, that not a single trade union in this country, not a single one, backs this deal. The TUC say, and I quote, "This would be a disaster for working people." Unison have said it would risk every workplace right and leave public services exposed and vulnerable. While Unite say, by further diluting the legal protections for labour and environmental standards, the Prime Minister has made the laws that underpin workers' rights and public safety extremely vulnerable in future trade deals. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. But we should also look at the business case. Please forgive me for not giving way. We're extremely pushed for time. What does this deal mean for business? Put it simply, for business, for our industries and our manufacturing, it reduces access to the market of our biggest trade partner, threatening jobs up and down our country at a time when more investment is needed, not less. There is no economic impact assessment and no accompanying legal advice. Funny that, I wonder why. Because according to The Guardian, Britain is on course to sacrifice as much as 130 billion in lost GDP growth over the next 15 years if the Brexit deal goes ahead. And industry's been clear on this. It needs that market access. It needs a customs union to keep vital supply chains flowing. Yet this deal sells them out. No barrier-free access, no customs union. Instead, it puts the fantasy of chasing damaging trade deals with Donald Trump over the needs of our country. Again, Mr. Speaker, you don't have to take my word for it. Make UK, who represent British manufacturing, are clear. commitments to the closest possible trading relationship in goods have gone. And that, Mr. Speaker, this deal will add cost and bureaucracy, and our companies will face a lack of clarity inhibiting investment and planning. Even the CBI have added the deal remains inadequate on services, and that they have now serious concerns about the direction of the future UK-EU relationship. So this is a bad deal for industry, a bad deal for manufacturing, and more importantly, a bad deal for jobs. But, Mr. Speaker, let's look at what this deal will mean for the environment. Let's see what Green groups are saying about it. Greener UK, for instance. They've raised huge...
Order. There is an excessive noise in the chamber. It's very unfair on the honourable lady who's developing her contribution. Let's listen to each other courteously. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Greener UK, for instance, they've raised huge concerns, saying environmental safeguards are absent from the new withdrawal agreement, and that the toothless environment bill put forward by the government, and I quote, provides neither an enforcement body with independence nor a commitment to non-regression in domestic law. All at a time when we are facing a climate crisis across the world. This is simply not acceptable. And, Mr. Speaker, this government is asking us to simply trust them on all these issues, quite tellingly without setting out any detail or legislation today. The Prime Minister says nobody in his government wants to reduce rights or standards in this country. Well, that is a remarkable statement, especially when you look at their track record. How can we trust them? Well, members on the opposite benches can cheer all they like, but how can we trust a Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy when she has made clear that for small businesses she envisages there being, and I quote, no regulation whatsoever, no minimum wage, no maternity or paternity rights, no unfair dismissal rights, no pension rights? How can we trust the Foreign Secretary, who wrote a pamphlet called Escaping the Straitjacket, which outlined his plans to cut workers' rights and regulations? And how can we trust the Prime Minister himself, who has said the UK should scrap the social chapter and has claimed the current weight of employment regulation is backbreaking? Mr. Speaker, the answer is we can't trust them. If their intentions were to maintain current standards, then why have they slashed every level playing field commitment in the withdrawal agreement? So, Mr. Speaker, we are about to make history, and in the final moments before we enter those lobbies, MPs will consider the weight placed upon their shoulders. Is this deal right for their communities, industries and future generations? No, it isn't. Agreeing this deal doesn't get Brexit done. Instead, it would sell out our country and sell out our communities, leaving us open to an onslaught of deregulation, reduction of rights, putting jobs at risk. And it's something no Labour MP nor any other MP worried about protecting their community could ever support.
Mr. Michael Gove.
Mr. Speaker, our democracy is a precious thing, and this Parliament is a special place. Our democracy depends on respect for difference, and this Parliament thrives on respecting the sincerity and the commitment to public service of every member. And that is why I know that deciding how to vote today for many members will have been difficult. And it is important that all of us recognise that for those who argued to remain and still argue that that is the best outcome, they do so as patriots, but they take a different view from some of us. And for those who argued to leave and have consistently argued that we should leave and have argued for a better deal, we should all recognise that they are arguing for what they believe is best for our country. I respect those who have argued for both positions, but I respect most of all the many people in this House who argued that we should remain, who during the course of that campaign believed that it was the best course for the country, but who now recognise that the people having spoken, that verdict must be respected. And that is why, not yet, and that is why, in a debate characterised by many brilliant and passionate speeches, the speech that stood out for me was the speech by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead. She argued for Remain. but she also recognised that when the people had spoken, their verdict had to be respected. And it is not just on our benches, it is on every bench. Members like the member for Great Grimsby, or the member for Don Valley, or for Rother Valley, they all argued that we should remain. But now they recognise that there is something more precious than being a Leaver or a Remainer. That is being a Democrat. What unites us in this House is that we are Democrats. And we voted in this House of Commons to have a referendum. We voted in this House of Commons to say that we would respect the verdict of the people. We voted overwhelmingly for Article 50, which honoured that referendum and said that we would leave. How will it look to those who sent us here now if we say to them, we made those sacred promises, but now we choose to dishonour them? Now, it is the case, I know that there will be individuals who will have specific qualms and concerns about this deal, and they exist all across this House. But it is also the case that the time has come for us to decide. None of us in a country that voted 52-48, none of us in a House of 650 members, none of us in a country of 65 million people can ensure that we have our own perfect Brexit. No. But what we can do is we can be prepared to put aside our perfect for the sake of the common good. And that is what the public want us to do now. In his speech, the member for Holborn and St Pancras laid out some of the concerns that he has about the political declaration. But he knows and we know that if we vote today for the deal, if we vote for this withdrawal agreement, we can then move on to ensure that the future economic partnership that we all want can be framed in the best interests of the British people. And we have given, I shan't give way to the honourable gentleman, but I'm grateful for his persistence. We can ensure...
Order! The Chancellor of the Duchy is not currently giving way. Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And during that discussion about our future economic partnership, every party in this House, every voice in this House will have equal weight and equal value in making sure that we can deliver a Brexit deal that delivers for the 52 and for the 48. That is our intention. And let me be clear, we on this side of the House, no I shan't and no I won't. However tempting it might be, I will decline on this occasion. Now, the truth is, because no deal can ever satisfy anyone, we could spend all our time searching for that elusive perfect deal. But what would that position look like to the country? What would it look like to all those who have sent us here? What would it look like to the Honourable Lady's constituents who voted to leave and expected that vote to be honoured? They voted to put trust in this place, to put trust in Parliament, to make a vital decision. If we duck that decision, if we delay, then I'm afraid that people will feel a sense of depression and dismay and demoralisation that the Parliament that they hoped would keep its promises has chosen once again to duck its responsibilities. Now, I am clear also that everyone who has spoken in this debate has spoken from the best of motives, including my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, a dear and old friend of mine. But one of the things that I would say to him and to others, and on that point I have to give up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the Chancellor for giving way. Everybody has their beliefs, and everybody does what they believe is right, including our honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. If the bill that follows the meaningful vote were to fail, how would the government avoid no deal before the end of October?
One of the things that this government is absolutely committed to doing is making sure that we have a deal. And one of the things that we're also committed to doing is making sure that we obey the law. And one of the things that we're also committed to doing is making sure that we respect the voices of all of those in this House. Let me stay firmly from this dispatch box. This government is committed to ensuring that we have a deal. And the best way the best way of getting that deal, leaving on October the 31st, and being able to move on to the other issues which the people in this country want us to discuss is by accepting the honourable motives of the mover of the amendment, but recognising also that if we accept that amendment, we will not have a meaningful vote today. We will not unlock the door to a deal being passed. We will have voted, I'm afraid, in the terms of that motion for more delay. And I'm afraid on that basis, I would urge everyone who wants us to honour the referendum mandate to recognise that that amendment, however sincerely it's been put, is unnecessary. What is necessary now is for us to reach a moment of decision. In the other place, Lord Judge, the leader of the crossbench peers, in some respects, the voice of moderation in that House, explicitly said that the time is past for people to quibble and question the precise terms of this deal. He said, a former Lord Chief Justice, that Parliament needs to get on with it. Otherwise, there will be profound damage to public confidence in this place. And that is the question that every member of the House must ask. How will our constituents feel if tonight we vote to support this deal without the amendment? Our constituents will feel that a cloud has been lifted, that Parliament listened to them with respect, that the vote in 2016 that we promised to honour has, after 3.5 years of deadlock and division, been honoured by a House that at last is ready to unite. And that is the choice that faces us all. Because if we don't vote for this deal unamended, then I'm afraid that all of those who send us here watching our deliberations will say that Parliament has failed to meet the moment. Parliament has failed to rise to the occasion. Parliament has failed to ensure that an important democratic vote, the most important vote with the greatest number of votes cast for any proposition in our history, will be delayed, will be dishonoured, and will not be delivered. And that is why I urge everyone in this House to recognise our first duty is to the principle that underpins this place.
Said no. The Right Honourable Gentleman is responding to the debate, and he will do so to a conclusion. Mr. Michael Gove.
Our first duty to our constituents and to our country is to keep our promises. This House said that we would honour that referendum mandate. The time has come. And the question that all of us must answer when we return to our constituencies is, did you vote to break the deadlock? Did you vote to end the division of these days? Did you vote to bring the country together? I know that members across this House will support the government this afternoon to do just that.
Sir, I beg to move that the questions...
Well, I am indeed putting the question. I'm extremely grateful. The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby. You too. Order. The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Thangham Debonair and Matt Weston. Tellers for the noes, Mr. Stuart Andrew and Mr. Ian Stewart.